You know, there's a saying, blood is thicker than water. For most of my life I believed that. I lived by it. It's a lesson I learned the hard way, the kind of lesson that burns a hole right through you, leaving you empty and cold on the other side. My lesson cost me 8 years of my life, and every penny I ever made. It all started with a phone call. Not a dramatic movie-style call in the middle of the night, but a cheerful, sunny afternoon call from my mom. I was on my lunch break, sitting in my truck, scrolling through pictures of houses I knew I couldn't afford yet. "Honey, we have wonderful news," she chirped, her voice buzzing with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. I smiled. "Yeah? Did Dad finally fix the leaky faucet?" I joked. My dad had been on disability for years after a bad fall at his construction job. It wasn't his fault, but it had turned him into a shadow of the man he once was. The mortgage on their small 2-bedroom house, the house I grew up in, became a monster that was slowly eating them alive. That's where I came in. The day I graduated from trade school and got my first real job as an electrician, I sat them down. I saw the worry in their eyes, the stacks of bills on the kitchen table. "Don't worry," I'd said, feeling like the man of the house for the first time. "I've got this. I'll cover the mortgage. You guys just focus on getting by." My mom cried. My dad, a man of few words, just gripped my shoulder, his eyes glassy. It was a promise, and for 8 years I kept it. 8 years. Think about that. While my friends were going on vacations, buying new cars, and putting down payments on their own places, I was living in a tiny rented room, eating cheap meals, and sending the bulk of my paycheck directly to my parents' bank. Every overtime hour I worked, every weekend I gave up, it was for them, for that house. I didn't see it as a sacrifice. I saw it as my duty, my love for them in action. I imagined one day, the house would be paid off. Maybe they'd leave it to me. It was a silent understanding, a family legacy I was building with my own sweat and calloused hands. So on the phone that day, I was expecting good news. Maybe they'd won a small lottery prize. Maybe Dad's physical therapy was finally showing results. Even better, my mom said, laughing. We sold the house. The world went quiet. The sounds of the busy street outside my truck faded to a dull hum. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. You what? I managed to say. "We sold it. We got a fantastic offer, way over asking price. We're finally free, honey. No more debt." I couldn't process it. "But where will you live?" "Oh, that's the other part of the news. We're moving in with your Aunt Carol for a little while, just until we get settled." Something wasn't right. The tone in her voice, it was too cheerful, too neat. I felt like a character in a story, who hadn't been given the whole script. "Okay," I said slowly, my mind racing. "Wow, so the money from the sale, that's a good nest egg for you guys. You deserve it." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line, a tiny fractional hesitation that told me everything I needed to know. "Well, about that," my mom began, her voice losing some of its sparkle. "You know your cousin Leo. He's had such a tough time, bless his heart. His little startup ideas never seem to pan out. He's got so much potential, but he just needs a real chance." Leo, my cousin, the family's golden boy. While I was working 60-hour weeks, Leo was finding himself in Thailand, then exploring his artistic side in a ridiculously expensive workshop, then trying to launch an app for rating artisanal toast. His parents, my aunt and uncle, had enabled his every whim, but their money was finally running out. "What about Leo?" I asked, my voice flat. I already knew the answer. I felt it in my bones. "Well, your father and I had a long talk," she said, her voice now taking on that preachy righteous tone she used when she was justifying something she knew was wrong. "We decided that the best use for this money, for the good of the whole family, was to give Leo the seed capital he needs to start his new business, a real one this time, a high-end gentleman's lounge. It's going to be a huge success. He just needed a foundation." I was silent. I couldn't speak. The sandwich in my lap suddenly seemed disgusting. My hands were trembling. 8 years, nearly a decade of my life. I'd paid off the vast majority of that mortgage. It was my money, my sacrifice, my future that I had poured into the foundation of that house. You gave him the money," I whispered. "All of it." "Yes. Isn't it wonderful to see family helping family?" she said, completely oblivious to the sound of my world shattering through the phone. "We knew you'd understand, honey. You're so strong. You've always been our rock. You don't need the money like he does. You can always make more. You can always make more. Those 5 words broke me. I wasn't their son. I was a resource, a tool, a rock they could stand on to lift up someone else. I don't remember what I said to end the call. I think I just mumbled, "Okay," and hung up. I sat in my truck for a full hour, staring at the steering wheel. The initial shock turned into a deep gut-wrenching pain. It felt like a physical wound. My own parents had looked at my 8 years of sacrifice and decided it was worth nothing. They had sold my future and given it to my cousin, the court jester. That night, I didn't sleep. The pain began to curdle. It twisted and hardened into something else, something cold and sharp. Anger. A rage so pure and so potent it scared me. But underneath the rage, a thought began to form. A tiny dark seed. They thought I was a rock, solid, dependable and unmoving. They were about to find out that rocks can be used for 2 things: to build foundations, or to tear them down. The next few days were a blur. I went to work. I came home. I stared at the ceiling. I ignored their calls. They left voicemails. "Are you okay, honey? We're worried. Call us back. We want to celebrate with you." Celebrate. The audacity was breathtaking. Finally I agreed to meet them. They wanted to have a family dinner at my aunt and uncle's house. Of course they did. They wanted to parade their grand gesture in front of everyone. Leo would be there, the conquering hero, and I was expected to be there, the good son, smiling and applauding. I walked into that house, and the air was thick with smug satisfaction. My Uncle Robert clapped me on the back. "Your parents are saints, you know that. What they did for my boy." Leo came over, a smug grin plastered on his face. He was wearing a new expensive-looking jacket. "Hey man, no hard feelings, right? It's for the family. When my lounge takes off, I'll buy you a drink. First one's on the house." He winked. I just stared at him. I looked at my parents, beaming with pride. They had created this narrative, where they were the selfless heroes, and I was the supporting cast. They had erased my contribution completely. I sat through the dinner, a ghost at the table. I listened to them toast to Leo's future, to his brilliance, to my parents' generosity. With every clink of their wine glasses, that cold thing inside me grew. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was purpose. After dinner my mom pulled me aside. "I know this might be a little hard for you to understand right now," she said, patting my arm. "But it was the right thing to do. You're self-sufficient. Leo isn't." "The mortgage, Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I paid the mortgage for 8 years. She waved her hand dismissively. "That was your gift to us. A son helping his parents. It's different. This is an investment in the family's future." That was it. That was the moment the last shred of my old self died. The dutiful son, the loving child. He was gone. In his place stood someone they didn't know, someone they had created. I went home that night, and I didn't just think. I planned. Revenge is a word that sounds ugly and brutish. What I wanted was more elegant. I didn't just want to take their money. Money was the symbol, not the source. The source was their pride, their reputation, their perfect family image. I wanted to dismantle the entire fantasy they had built, brick by brick, until they were left sitting in the rubble, with nothing but the truth. My plan started with a small nagging memory. A few years ago, I'd been helping my dad clean out the attic of their house. Tucked away in a dusty corner was an old metal lockbox that belonged to my grandfather, my dad's dad. He had passed away when I was a teenager. My dad had been sentimental about it, saying it was full of old memories. I remembered asking what was in it, and he'd been weirdly evasive. "Just old papers, son. Nothing important. Nothing important." My parents had a habit of saying that about things that were in fact very important. The house had been sold, but the new owners hadn't moved in yet. I knew the real estate agent. I called her, put on my most charming voice. "Hey Sarah, it's Alex. You know, I think I left a box of old tools in the attic of my parents' place. Any chance I could swing by for 5 minutes and grab it? The new owners won't mind, will they?" She was happy to help. "Of course, Alex. I'll leave the key under the mat for you tomorrow morning." The next day my heart hammered against my ribs as I walked up the driveway of the house I had paid for but never owned. Letting myself in felt like a violation, but I pushed the feeling down. I went straight to the attic, and there it was, sitting in the corner, just as I remembered. The metal lockbox. It was locked, of course, but I was a tradesman. Locks were just simple puzzles to me. It took me less than 10 minutes, with a couple of tension wrenches and a pick. The lid creaked open. Inside, beneath a stack of old yellowed photographs, was a thick manila envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. It contained 2 documents. The first was my grandfather's last will and testament. The second was a legal-looking letter from his lawyer, addressed to my parents. I sat there, on the dusty floor of that empty attic, and I read. The will was simple. He left his assets to be divided between his children. But there was a special clause, a section dedicated to me, his first and only grandchild at the time. He had set aside a sum of money from a private investment portfolio, $30,000. It wasn't a life-changing fortune, but to a young man, it was the world. The will clearly stated it was to be held in trust by my parents, and given to me on my 25th birthday, to help me start my own life. I was 32. My 25th birthday had come and gone 7 years ago. The letter from the lawyer confirmed it. It detailed the transfer of the funds into an account controlled by my parents. They had received the money. They had hidden it. They had never said a word. The timeline clicked into place in my head, with a sickening thud. They received that money just a few months before my dad's accident. They weren't broke. Not completely. They could have used that money, my money, to stay afloat for years. But they didn't. They hid it. And then they asked me to start paying the mortgage. They hadn't just accepted my help. They had orchestrated the entire situation. They had let me sacrifice my youth, my dreams, my money, all while they were sitting on a secret nest egg that was rightfully mine. The money from the sale of the house wasn't about helping Leo. It was about them cashing out, taking the money I had poured into the property, and adding it to the pile they had already stolen from me, then laundering it through a gift to my cousin to make themselves look like saints. The cold anger I'd felt before was nothing compared to this. This was a glacier of pure crystalline rage. It was so vast, so deep, it made me feel perfectly calm. My path was clear. I wasn't just going to tear down their reputation. I was going to get back what was mine. And I was going to make them pay for every single lie. I took the will and the letter, left the empty box, and walked out of that house for the last time. Phase 1 of my plan was about to begin, and it was all going to center on the person they had chosen over me, my cousin Leo. Leo was an idiot, but he was an arrogant idiot. That was his weakness. He believed he was a visionary, a misunderstood genius. His new gentleman's lounge was the perfect embodiment of his vanity. He had no real business plan, just a vague idea of leather chairs, expensive whiskey, and exclusivity. He thought that if you build something that looks cool, people will just show up. I needed to get close to him, but I couldn't do it as myself. So I created a new identity. I bought a cheap burner phone, and created a new email address, under the name Adam Cole, a supposed freelance business consultant. I spent a week building a fake professional profile online, populating it with jargon-filled articles about luxury brand marketing and hospitality trends. Then I made my move. I sent an email to the generic address, listed on Leo's flimsy new website. I introduced myself as a consultant, who specialized in launching high-end venues. I told him I'd heard buzz about his project, and was incredibly impressed with his vision. I offered him a free 1-hour consultation. I knew his ego wouldn't be able to resist. He replied within 20 minutes. We met at a coffee shop. I wore a blazer I bought from a thrift store, and a pair of non-prescription glasses. I talked a big game, using all the corporate buzzwords I'd researched: synergy, disruption, curated experiences. Leo's eyes lit up. He was eating out of the palm of my hand. My problem, he said, leaning in conspiratorially, is that I have this great nest egg, but I need to make it look bigger. I need to attract real investors down the line. Perfect. What you need, Leo, I said, looking him straight in the eye, is to create the illusion of immediate, overwhelming success. You can't open small and grow. You have to launch big. You have to spend money to make money. Over the next 2 months, I became his shadow, his trusted advisor, and I gave him the worst possible advice, all wrapped up in a shiny, appealing package. Don't go with that local contractor, I'd tell him. You need a high-end design firm from the city. Yes, it's triple the price, but it's about the brand. That sound system is fine, but is it the best? You want a system that whispers quality. It'll cost you an extra 40 grand, but it's an investment in the ambiance. You need to hire staff now, months before you open. Get them trained. Pay them top dollar to get the best. You can't risk having amateurs on opening night. Every piece of advice was designed to make him burn through his cash as quickly and as inefficiently as possible. He was signing contracts with vendors at inflated prices. He was buying $10,000 light fixtures when a $100 one would do. He was paying a full staff to sit around in an unfinished building. My parents would call me occasionally. "We heard you and Leo are getting along." My mom would say, thrilled, "I'm so glad you're supporting him. He's my cousin." I'd say, my voice dripping with false sincerity, "I want to see him succeed." While Leo was busy building his monument to failure, I was working on phase 2. The will was my atomic bomb, but I couldn't just drop it. I needed the right setting, the right audience, and I knew the perfect occasion was coming up. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary. They were planning a huge party at a fancy rented hall. All their friends, all their family, everyone who had ever heard the story of their selfless gift to Leo would be there. They wanted to be celebrated. I was going to give them a celebration they would never forget. I even offered to help plan it. I booked the DJ. I helped with the guest list. I played the part of the devoted son, healed from his initial disappointment, and now fully on board with the family first mantra. My parents were ecstatic. They saw it as proof that they had been right all along, that their good, strong son had come around. The week before the party, I made one last visit to Leo's project. It was a disaster zone of half-finished construction and expensive plastic-wrapped furniture. The contractors were complaining about late payments. The staff he'd hired were getting restless. Leo, however, was oblivious. He was standing in the middle of the chaos, a glass of champagne in his hand, admiring a gold-plated tap he'd just had installed in the bar. "It's gonna be epic, Adam," he said to me, his eyes gleaming. "Epic. It sure is, Leo," I said. "It sure is." I knew his main suppliers. I knew his bank. I knew that he had leveraged everything, promising payments upon the grand opening, which he had scheduled for the week after the anniversary party. He was stretched so thin that a single gust of wind could knock the whole thing over. I had spent months building a house of cards for him, and I was about to kick out the table. The night of the party arrived. I wore my best suit. I walked into the hall and it was exactly as they'd imagined. A room full of smiling faces, music playing, people congratulating my parents on 40 years of marriage. They stood at the entrance, greeting people, glowing with pride. My mother was wearing a new dress. My father was smiling more than I'd seen him smile in a decade. They looked happy, untouchable. I mingled. I smiled. I accepted thanks from relatives for being such a good sport about the whole Leo situation. Each compliment was like fuel on the fire. Midway through the evening, the time came for speeches. My uncle went first, talking about what a wonderful couple they were. Then Aunt Carol. Then my dad got up and motioned for me. "I'd like my son Alex to say a few words." My rock. The room applauded. I walked up to the microphone, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. This was it. I looked out at the crowd. I saw my parents, their faces beaming with love. I saw Leo, giving me a thumbs up from the back. I saw all the people who had bought into the lie. I took a deep breath. 40 years, I began, my voice clear and calm. That's an incredible milestone. It's a testament to partnership, to sacrifice, and to building a life together. And I've learned a lot about sacrifice from my parents. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. My mom dabbed her eye with a napkin. For the last 8 years, I continued, I had the privilege of helping them. I paid their mortgage. I made sure they had a roof over their heads. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because that's what a family does. You support each other. You build a foundation together. I looked directly at my parents. Their smiles were starting to look a little fixed. So you can imagine my surprise when they sold that house, the foundation I helped build, and gave the money away. But I understood. It was for family, for my cousin Leo's dream. Leo puffed out his chest a little. But what I've been struggling with, I said, my voice dropping slightly, is the idea of fairness and secrets. You see, I was in the attic of the old house recently, and I found something that belonged to my grandfather. A nervous murmur rippled through the room. My dad's face went pale. My mom's hand flew to her necklace. I found his will. I said, pulling a folded photocopied document from my jacket pocket. And I'd like to read a small part of it to you all. It's a clause written specifically for me. I unfolded the paper and read slowly and clearly. To my grandson, Alex, I bequeath the sum of $30,000 to be held in trust by his parents, and to be given to him upon his 25th birthday, to assist him in the beginning of his own independent life. I let the words sink in. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I turned 25 7 years ago, I said, looking right at my parents. Their faces had crumbled. The pride, the joy, it had all vanished, replaced by sheer naked panic. For 8 years I sacrificed my own future to pay for a house, believing my parents were struggling. But they weren't. Not really. They were sitting on money that was mine. They hid it from me. They let me work myself to the bone. Then they cashed out the house, added the profits from my labor to the inheritance they stole from me, and gave it all away. Not as a gift, but to hide what they had done. My dad tried to stand up, to say something, but he just sank back into his chair, his face ashen. My mom was staring at her plate, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't the tears of a proud mother. They were the tears of a woman whose world had just been exposed as a lie. The murmuring in the room grew louder. People were turning to each other, whispering. The looks they were giving my parents were no longer looks of admiration. They were looks of confusion, of pity, of disgust. Just then, as if on cue, Leo's phone buzzed loudly. Then again, and again. He pulled it out, a confused look on his face. I knew what those messages were. They were from his bank, from his general contractor, from the design firm. The day before, I had anonymously sent copies of Leo's over-leveraged contracts and his dwindling bank balance to his primary creditors. I'd sent them to the design firm he owed 6 figures to. I'd let them know the gentleman's lounge was a fantasy built on fumes. I knew they would panic. I knew they would call in their debts immediately. Leo's face went from confused, to worried, to utterly terrified. He stood up, knocking his chair over, and rushed out of the room, shouting into his phone. The party was over. The lie was dead. I placed the copy of the will on the table in front of my parents. "Happy anniversary," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of all those eyes on me. But for the first time in 8 years, I didn't feel like I was carrying the world on my shoulders. I felt light. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was exactly what I had planned. Leo's business imploded before it even opened. He was bankrupt and in debt up to his eyeballs. My aunt and uncle, who had basked in the reflected glory of their son's genius, were now facing the shame of his failure. They blamed my parents for giving him the money in the first place. My parents became social outcasts. The story of the hidden inheritance spread through the family and their circle of friends like wildfire. Their reputation for being selfless, loving parents was shattered. They were seen for what they were: selfish, manipulative, and deceitful. They tried calling me, sending long rambling texts full of excuses and blame. It was Leo's fault for being a failure. It was my grandfather's fault for putting them in that position. It was my fault for being so dramatic and airing our private business in public. Never once did they apologize. Never once did they take responsibility. I never got the $30,000 back, or the money I'd paid into the mortgage. I knew I never would. But that was never the point. My revenge wasn't about money. It was about truth. I took the original will to a lawyer. He said I had a strong case to sue my parents for the inheritance. But I decided against it. Dragging them through court would keep them in my life. It would keep me tied to them. And my goal wasn't to be tied to them anymore. My goal was to be free. I left that town. I moved a few states away, found a new job, and started over. I bought a small starter home. It's not much, but it's mine. I paid for it with my own money, for my own future. Sometimes, late at night, I think about them. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel sadness. I just feel nothing. They are strangers to me now. Ghosts from a life that no longer belongs to me. They thought I was a rock, something they could use and discard. They were right about one thing. I am a rock. But a rock isn't just a foundation for someone else's house. A rock is what you use to build your own. Thanks for listening to my story. It's not a happy one, but it's real. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who teach you the hardest lessons. If you've ever felt betrayed or taken for granted, I hope my story reminds you of your own strength. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and leave a comment below to share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please share the video. Your support means the world.